A man fought giants. One man faced 900 iron chariots. Another man stood against an army alone, and one stayed loyal until his final breath. These are the forgotten warriors of the Bible. One wrong move, and he would die. Joab served King David and became the strongest warrior in the kingdom. But everything changed after one tragic moment. His enemy had killed his little brother in an accident which enraged Joab. He killed the king's own son. He betrayed his most loyal friend. He killed his own replacement. He was a very ruthless man, but that would soon come to an end. Joab was one of King David's greatest warriors. He had two brothers, Abishai and Asahel, and all three fought for David from the very beginning. Of the three, Joab rose the highest. He became commander of David's entire army, the strongest military man in the kingdom. He was loyal to David without question, and he was fearless in battle, but he was also ruthless. During a war that split the whole nation in two, when Israel's first king, Saul, died in battle, the kingdom broke apart. David became king over one half, and a rival king, backed by a commander named Abner, ruled the other half. The two sides eventually fought each other in an open battle, and by the end of the day, Abner's army had broken and started to run. As Abner fled the field, Joab's younger brother Asahel, a soldier known for how fast he could run, chased after him. Abner turned and saw him coming and called out a warning.
"Turn aside! Fight someone else!"
Asahel kept running. Abner warned him again, telling him plainly that he did not want to kill Joab's own brother. Asahel would not stop. When there was nowhere left to run and no more room to argue, Abner struck backward with the end of his spear, and it killed Asahel instantly. Joab did not take the murder of his little brother lightly. To everyone else on that battlefield, Asahel was another soldier who had fallen in war. But to Joab, he was the younger brother he had spent his entire life beside. Long before any of them became known as warriors, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel were simply three brothers growing up together. They grew up in a time where a man learned early that knowing how to fight was the most important thing in life. The three brothers were different from the beginning. Asahel, the youngest, was known for his incredible speed and energy, always wanting to prove that he belonged beside his older brothers. Abishai grew into a fearless fighter, a man who was always ready to step forward when danger came. But Joab was different. Even as the oldest brother, he naturally became the one who led. Growing up together created a bond between the brothers that would follow them onto the battlefield. They did not just fight beside each other because they served the same king. They fought because they were family. After the death of Asahel, this became a wound that never healed in Joab. He chased Abner for the rest of that day, all the way to a hill in the distance, before finally agreeing to call his men back for the night. But something in him had already changed. From that day forward, he was waiting for his chance to kill Abner. Years passed, and the war between the two kingdoms slowly turned in David's favor. Eventually, Abner grew tired of fighting a war he could no longer win, and he came to make peace with David directly. David welcomed him warmly. He held a feast for him and sent him away in peace, believing the long war was finally over. Joab was away when this happened. When he returned and learned that Abner had come and gone freely, without any punishment, for what he had done to Asahel, he went straight to David, furious.
"What have you done? You let him go, and now he's gone for good."
David gave no answer that satisfied him. So Joab acted on his own. He sent riders after Abner without telling David and had him brought back to the city. At the gate, Joab walked toward him like an old friend. "How are you, my brother?" he said warmly, reaching out to take hold of Abner's beard as if to kiss him in greeting. Abner never saw the sword hidden in Joab's other hand. Joab drove it into his stomach, and Abner died there in the street. The peace David had just made with the north was undone in a single moment, and the man responsible was David's own commander. Not long after this, David set his eyes on capturing the city of Jerusalem for himself. He announced to his army that whoever led the attack and struck the city first would be named commander over the entire army. Joab took the challenge and led the charge himself, becoming the first man into the city. True to his word, David gave him the position. From that day forward, Joab commanded every soldier in Israel. At that time, Joab had a very loyal friend. His name was Uriah. During long campaigns, when most soldiers slept, Joab and Uriah would still be awake beside the dying fire, speaking about the battles they had survived. One night, after a difficult victory, Uriah noticed Joab sitting alone sharpening his sword. "You never stop thinking about the next battle, do you?" Uriah asked. Joab looked at him and answered, "Because the enemy doesn't warn you before he strikes." Uriah looked around at the soldiers sleeping beside them. If a man calls you brother, he should never be the one holding the knife behind your back. Joab looked back into the fire and said nothing. Years later, David had done something terrible. He had taken another man's wife for himself, gotten her pregnant, and now needed her husband gone without anyone finding out the truth. The husband's name was Uriah, fighting far away at the front lines of a siege. David wrote a letter to Joab, sealed it, and sent it back to the war with Uriah himself carrying it, never knowing what was written inside. The letter gave Joab a simple, terrible order. Place Uriah where the fighting is worst, then pull everyone else back and let him die there alone.
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
Joab read the letter and said nothing about it to Uriah. He was devastated. He looked over the enemy's walls and found the place where the fiercest fighters were gathered.
Send him there. There? But Commander, that's certain death! He won't survive that.
Joab answered simply.
It has to be done.
The attack went forward exactly as planned. The enemy soldiers rushed out to meet the charge, and just as the fighting reached its worst, Joab's men pulled back, leaving Uriah standing alone. He was struck down there exactly the way David had ordered. Joab sent a messenger back to Jerusalem with careful instructions on exactly what to say if David grew upset about the number of men lost in that attack.
If he asks why you got so close to the wall, just add this at the end. Your servant Uriah is dead also.
The messenger delivered the report exactly as instructed, and David answered without any concern at all. "Don't let it trouble you," he said. "The sword takes one man as easily as another." Joab had obeyed the darkest order David ever gave him, without hesitation and without ever asking why. Years after that, David's own family began falling apart. His son Absalom eventually rose up in rebellion against David himself, gathering enough support from the people that David was forced to flee his own city. When the two armies finally prepared to meet in battle, David gave one clear order to every commander marching out, loud enough for the whole army to hear it. "Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom," he said. Joab heard this order with everyone else. He ignored it completely. During the battle, a soldier came running to Joab with urgent news. Absalom, fleeing on his mule, had gotten caught by his own hair in the branches of a tree, left hanging there helplessly while his mule ran off without him. Joab asked the soldier immediately why he hadn't killed him on the spot. The soldier answered that he had heard the king's order with his own ears and would never touch Absalom, no matter what reward was offered. Joab did not waste any more time. He took 3 spears in his hand and drove them straight into Absalom's heart, while the young man still hung there alive in the tree. When news of Absalom's death reached David, the king broke down completely. He wept as he climbed the stairs above the city gate, crying out for his son over and over, wishing out loud that he had died instead. His grief spread through the entire army until the soldiers who had won the battle that day crept quietly back into the city, ashamed. "You have humiliated every man who saved your life today. he told the king plainly. "If you don't go out right now and speak to them, not one of them will stay by your side by morning." David listened. He rose from his grief and went out to meet his soldiers at the gate, but he never forgave Joab for what he had done. As soon as the rebellion was over, David stripped Joab of his command and gave the army instead to a different man entirely, someone who had actually fought on Absalom's side during the rebellion. Joab said nothing about this insult out loud. He simply waited. Joab got his chance to get his old job back soon enough. A new rebellion broke out somewhere else in the kingdom. David sent the new commander to stop it, but that commander took too long gathering soldiers. David got tired of waiting, so he sent Joab's men out to deal with the threat instead. On the road, Joab ran into that same commander. Joab walked up to him like they were old friends.
How are you, my brother?
He said, reaching out one hand like he was going to hug him, but he had a sword hidden in his other hand. Before the man knew what was happening, Joab stabbed him, and he died right there in the road. Joab didn't stop or explain himself to anyone. That's how Joab got his job back for good. Years later, David got old and weak. One of his sons, Adonijah, saw his chance and started trying to make himself king before David had officially picked who would take over. Joab, after being loyal to David his whole life, made his final big mistake here. He picked Adonijah's side instead of Solomon, even though David had already promised the throne to Solomon. When Adonijah threw a party to celebrate becoming king, Joab was there celebrating with him. But the party didn't last long. Word came in that Solomon had already been made king, with David's own approval. Everyone at Adonijah's party panicked and ran. The whole plan fell apart before it even really started. Before David died, he gave his son Solomon some final advice. He told him to remember everything Joab had done, killing men who weren't even in a real war. And he told Solomon not to just let Joab die peacefully when he got old. After David died, Solomon began removing everyone he believed threatened his throne. Solomon had him killed. When Joab heard this, he knew he was probably next. So he ran to a holy place and grabbed onto the altar, since back then that was a spot where people could go to ask for protection. Solomon sent a man named Benaiah to deal with Joab. Come out, Benaiah told him. Joab said, "No, I'd rather die right here." Benaiah went back and told Solomon what Joab said. Solomon replied, "Then let it happen exactly like that." Benaiah went back a second time and told Joab to come out again. Joab said the same thing. "I'll die here." This time, Benaiah didn't leave. He killed Joab right there next to the altar.
Do you want to learn how to make these videos? Go to my YouTube page and watch the member-only video. I provide all the prompts I use, tools I use, and how I animate.
One wrong move, and Sibbecai would be crushed. Years after David defeated Goliath, another giant from the same terrifying bloodline entered the battlefield. Everyone feared his strength, but one forgotten warrior stepped forward instead of running away. He was not a man whose name was known throughout Israel the way David's was. He did not sit on a throne, and no crowds gathered to see him pass through the streets. He was counted among the 30, an elite group of warriors who fought directly for the king, called on for the hardest battles Israel faced. Later, David placed him in command of an entire division of the army. Years had passed since David struck down Goliath before the eyes of 2 armies. Israel remembered that day well. Goliath was gone, but the giants themselves were not gone. Other descendants of Rapha, the same towering line of warriors Goliath had come from, still lived among the Philistines. And when war broke out once again between the 2 nations, one of these giants marched out among the Philistine ranks. His name was Saph. Word of him spread through the Israelite camp before the armies had even met on open ground. Soldiers who had heard the stories about Goliath years before now heard the same kind of stories again. And the fear that had once gripped Israel's army at the sight of one giant returned at the mention of another. Saph stood taller than any ordinary man in either army. He wore armor heavier than most men could carry on a long march, yet it never seemed to slow him down. His weapon was almost as big as himself. Wherever he took his place in the Philistine line, the soldiers around him fought with greater confidence, certain that no Israelite would dare come near him. The two armies met at last at a place called Gob. The moment the Philistine line came into view, Saph walked forward a few paces ahead of the rest, letting the Israelites get a full look at him before the fighting even began. Some of the younger Israelite soldiers near the front visibly stepped back at the sight of him. Older soldiers who had stood on the field the day Goliath fell found themselves remembering that same fear all over again, the same instinct to look away rather than meet his eyes. The two lines came crashing together, and the battle spread quickly across the field. But it was near Saph that the fighting turned worst for Israel. He swung his weapon in wide, heavy arcs, and every time it connected with a shield, the soldier holding it staggered backward, sometimes dropping to one knee before scrambling away from a second blow. Soldier after soldier fell back from him. The Israelite army started losing and being pushed backward. It looked as though Saph alone might be enough to break Israel's entire formation apart. Sibbecai saw what was happening. He was not standing at the back of the army directing others from a distance. He was already among the front ranks, and from where he stood, he watched the line near Saph collapse further with every passing moment. Watched soldiers younger and less experienced than himself thrown backward again and again. He understood that someone needed to go meet the giant directly, or the whole battle would be lost at that single point in the line. So Sibbecai began moving toward him. He cut through the fighting, pushing past soldiers locked in combat on either side, closing the distance step by step. Other soldiers nearby noticed him moving with purpose in one direction, and some of them realized exactly where he was headed and exactly what he intended to do. A wounded soldier near the front, the soldier grabbed Sibbecai's arm as he passed.
"Don't go near him! Don't be a fool, it's suicide!"
But Sibbecai did not care and pulled away his arm. The look on his face was not normal. He didn't just want to kill the giant. He wanted to completely destroy him in front of both armies. As he came within reach, Saph turned and saw him coming. Rather than waiting, the giant stepped forward himself, confident that a man of ordinary size posed no real threat to him. He looked Sibbecai over and called out loud enough for the soldiers nearby to hear him over the noise of the battle.
"Is this the best Israel has left to send against me?"
Sibbecai said nothing. He planted his feet, raised his shield, and waited. Around them, soldiers on both sides began to notice what was happening at the center of the line. Israelite soldiers still fighting nearby glanced over between their own clashes, and word passed quickly from man to man that one of David's 30 had gone to meet Saph directly. Philistine soldiers turned to watch as well, some of them lowering their weapons for a moment, confident their champion needed no help finishing this. A few of them began shouting Saph's name, cheering him on before the first blow had even landed. Saph struck first, and the blow came down harder than anything Sibbecai had felt.
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from
any opponent before. His shield cracked under the impact, a long split running through the wood, and the force of it drove him back 3 full steps, nearly stumbling over a fallen soldier behind him. A gasp went up from the Israelite soldiers, close enough to see it happen. Saph laughed, loud and confident, and called out to his own men, "You see, one blow, and already he breaks." The Philistines nearby began cheering in earnest now, certain the fight was already decided. Sibbecai steadied himself and said nothing. He looked down at the crack running through his shield and understood immediately that it would not survive many more blows like that one. He could not win this fight by standing his ground and absorbing whatever Saph threw at him. If he kept trying to block blow for blow, the giant's strength alone would finish him within moments. Saph came at him again. Sibbecai did not raise his shield to meet it directly. And as Saph's weapon carried through the swing, Sibbecai noticed something. In the instant just after each heavy strike, Saph's whole body committed to the motion, his feet planted, his weapon swung fully through, and for a brief moment afterward, he was slow to recover his stance, slow to bring his weapon back to guard. It was only a heartbeat, but it was there. Sibbecai tested this. He let another wide swing pass by him, then darted in during that same brief opening, landing a quick strike against the giant's forearm before pulling back out of reach. It was not a deep wound, but it was the first blow to land at all. And it told Sibbecai everything he needed to know. Saph's size and strength made every one of his attacks devastating if they connected. But they also left him open right afterward, every single time. From that point on, Sibbecai changed how he fought. He stopped trying to meet Saph's strength with his own. He kept moving constantly, circling to one side and then the other, never standing still long enough for a heavy blow to find him squarely. Each time Saph swung and missed, Sibbecai darted in during that brief window before the giant could recover, landing small, quick strikes. None of these strikes alone would end the fight, but each one added up, and each one chipped away at both Saph's body and his composure. The Philistine cheering along the lines began to quiet. Saph was no longer landing the clean, crushing blows he had opened with, and instead was left swinging at empty air again and again, while cuts and bruises accumulated across his arms and legs. He had expected fear from his opponent, the same fear that had made so many Israelite soldiers step back at the mere sight of him. Instead, this soldier kept circling back toward him instead of running, refusing every instinct that should have sent him fleeing. This unsettled Saph more than any wound could have. He was used to men breaking before him, used to seeing soldiers retreat the moment they understood what they were facing. Sibbecai did neither. Saph's swings grew wilder as his frustration grew, wider and less controlled, no longer aimed with the same precision he had shown at the start of the fight. He began overcommitting to each strike, throwing his full weight behind blows that missed by wider and wider margins, his balance shifting further forward each time. Word spread through both armies that the fight at the center of the line had turned into something more than a quick and easy victory for the Philistine champion. Israelite commanders positioned further back turned their attention toward the clash. On the Philistine side, officers who had been confident only minutes before now watched with growing unease as their giant swung again and again, without landing a single solid blow. He raised his weapon high above his head, putting every remaining ounce of strength into a blow. And with the giant's whole body committed to that swing, Sibbecai drove his sword upward with everything he had left. Striking beneath Saph's guard, Saph staggered backward, his weapon slipping from his grip and falling to the ground beside him. Sibbecai did not hesitate. He struck again immediately, finishing what the first blow had started, and Saph collapsed to the ground at Gob, his massive frame crashing down hard enough that soldiers standing several paces away felt it through the earth beneath their own feet. For a moment, nothing happened at all. The clash of the wider battle seemed to fall completely silent around that one spot, both armies frozen, staring at the fallen giant lying motionless on the ground. Philistine soldiers nearest to him stood locked in place, unable to process what they were seeing. Israelite soldiers nearby stared just as silently. Then the silence broke all at once. A shout rose up from the Israelite side, one soldier, and then another, and then dozens more, as the truth of what had happened spread outward across the field. Philistine soldiers who had been cheering only minutes before now stood pale and shaken, their confidence collapsing as quickly as their champion had. Some of them dropped their weapons where they stood. Others turned and ran without waiting to see what would happen next, unwilling to stand where their strongest warrior had just fallen. Israel's soldiers surged forward into the gap Saph's fall had opened, and what had been an even grinding battle only minutes earlier now became a rout. The Philistine line broke apart entirely at the point where Saph had stood, and the retreat spread outward from there until the entire Philistine army was falling back toward its own territory, its formation shattered, its strongest warrior left dead on the field behind it. By the time the fighting at Gob finally ended, Israel had won a complete victory, and Sibbecai returned from that battlefield to rejoin the ranks of David's mighty men, counted once again among the 30.
Do you want to learn how to make these videos? Go to my YouTube page and watch the member-only video. I provide all the prompts I use, tools I use, and how I animate. These videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
Israel was suffering under a powerful Canaanite king named Jabin. His army was led by a commander named Sisera, and Sisera was not like other commanders. He controlled 900 iron chariots, one of the strongest weapons of that time. For 20 long years, Jabin and Sisera kept Israel under their power. The Israelites lived in fear. Mothers taught their children to run at the first sound of chariots. In the middle of this fear, in the town of Kadesh, there lived a man named Barak. He was not a king. He was not a famous fighter. He had no chariot, no sword forged from iron, no army standing behind him. He was simply a man trying to survive like everyone else, watching his people suffer year after year. But there was something different happening in Israel at that time. A woman named Deborah was a prophetess who served God. People from Israel came to her for advice and to help solve their problems. She was wise, she was trusted, and more than that, she spoke with a kind of authority that made people stop and listen. One day, Deborah sent word for Barak. Barak came to Deborah not knowing why she wanted to see him. But before Barak ever met Deborah, he had already heard her name. Travelers passing through Kadesh spoke about the woman who judged Israel. They said, people traveled long distances just to hear her wisdom. Some came with problems between families. Others came searching for guidance, and again, people returned saying the same thing. God was with her. So when the message came that Deborah wanted to see him, Barak knew this was not a normal invitation. Deborah looked at him and gave him a message from God. She said, "Go and gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. Lead them to Mount Tabor. God will bring Sisera there with his chariots and his army, and God will give you victory over him." Barak stood there in silence for a moment, turning the words over in his mind. 10,000 men against 900 iron chariots. He thought about the chariots he had seen from a distance. He thought about the stories, the villages burned, the roads no one dared travel. And he thought about what it would mean to stand in an open field, facing that kind of power with nothing but a spear and a shield. Then he gave Deborah his answer.
If you go with me, I will go. But if you do not go with me, I will not go.
Barak was afraid, but he still chose to obey. He trusted Deborah's connection to God more than he trusted his own courage.
Barak, I will go with you, but there is more to God's message. The victory will not be yours. A woman will triumph.
Sisera himself will fall by the hand of a woman. Barak didn't argue. He simply nodded and began preparing for what was coming. Barak returned to Kadesh and sent a message through the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. He called the men of Israel to gather and fight against Sisera. Many of them were afraid, because they knew how powerful Sisera's army was. Slowly, men began leaving their homes and joining Barak. 10,000 of them gathered at the base of Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor was high and difficult to climb. Sisera's powerful chariots were dangerous on flat land, but they could not easily fight on a mountain. Barak led his men up the mountain, and they waited. That night on Mount Tabor, Barak walked among his men. Some sharpened their weapons, knowing Sisera would soon arrive. One soldier looked at Barak and asked, "How can we defeat 900 chariots?" Barak looked at the army around him. He knew they were not stronger than Sisera, but he remembered the words Deborah had spoken. God had promised them victory. Down below, word reached Sisera that Israelites were massing on Tabor. A messenger entered Sisera's camp and told him that Barak had gathered an army. When Sisera's soldiers heard about Barak's army, some of them laughed. They had fought Israel before. They knew what happened when their chariots entered the battlefield. One soldier looked toward Mount Tabor in the distance. "They really think they can defeat us?" The other soldiers prepared their weapons without fear. To them, the battle was already finished before it even began. They trusted their chariots, they trusted their strength. They had no idea what was coming. When the news reached Sisera, his camp was already preparing for another day under his command. Sisera was not afraid. For 20 years he had watched Israel run from his chariots. To him, this was just another rebellion that would end like all the others. He ordered his soldiers to prepare. The chariots that had kept Israel afraid for years were brought out again. He could not ignore 10,000 armed men gathering so close to his territory. He gave the order, and his entire war machine began moving. One younger soldier approached Sisera carefully. He explained that there were problems waiting for him back home, and he asked for permission to leave for a short time. Sisera looked at him. Then he looked around at the other soldiers watching. To Sisera, there was only one thing that mattered: victory.
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
He told the soldier that the enemy would not wait for his problems, so neither would he. The soldier lowered his head and stepped back into line. The army continued preparing. This showed how ruthless Sisera truly was. Sisera gathered his army and brought his 900 iron chariots to the Kishon River. The ground shook as the chariots moved forward, with horses, soldiers, and weapons covering the valley below. From Mount Tabor, Barak and his men watched the powerful army coming toward them. Some of the men on the mountain went pale. A few whispered that this was madness, that no one could win against such a force.
I don't know.
Then Deborah turned to Barak and spoke again. "Go," she said. "This is the day. God has gone ahead of you." Barak looked at his men. Then he looked down into the valley where Sisera's army covered the land with iron chariots and soldiers. He thought about 20 years of fear. 20 years of families hiding, villages suffering, and people running whenever they heard the sound of chariot wheels. He gave the command, and 10,000 men came down off the mountain. What happened next seemed impossible at first. Before the battle began, a few drops of rain touched the ground. One of Sisera's soldiers looked up at the sky, but ignored it. The chariots had never failed them before. But slowly the ground beneath them began to change. As Sisera's chariots pushed across the plain toward the river Kishon, the sky darkened. Rain came, sudden and heavy. The river swelled. The plain that had once been solid and open, perfect ground for chariots to move freely, became a trap. Wheels that once rolled like thunder now sank into the mud. Horses stumbled and panicked, pulling against harnesses that would not budge. Chariots that had terrorized Israel for 20 years became stuck. Barak's men swept down from the mountain into the chaos. What happened next was not the long, difficult battle everyone had feared. It became a complete defeat for Sisera's army. Soldiers who once rode proudly into battle now climbed out of their trapped chariots, trying to escape on foot through the mud. Weapons that once made Israel afraid were no longer enough to stop Barak's men as they attacked from every direction. In only a few moments, Sisera had lost the greatest advantage his army had. Barak pushed forward with his men, cutting through the confusion. Chariots lay abandoned in the mud, horses running loose across the field, soldiers throwing down weapons. The army that had crushed Israel for 20 years fell apart in a single afternoon. Sisera himself understood quickly that the battle was lost. He leaped down from his own chariot and ran, choosing to escape on foot rather than risk being trapped in the mud like the rest of his men. He fled across the plain alone, leaving his soldiers behind, leaving his entire war machine behind. Barak and his men chased the remains of the army all the way to Haroshet Hagoyim. Every soldier of Sisera's army fell that day. Not one was left standing. The chariots that had once rolled across Israel with such terrifying confidence now sat empty and broken in the mud, useless pieces of iron sinking slowly into the earth. But Sisera was still alive, and Barak knew that as long as the commander lived, the threat was not fully over. Far away from the battlefield was the tent of Jael. That morning had started like any other day. There were no armies around her, no sound of battle, no chariots. She did not know that the commander everyone feared was about to arrive at her own tent. While Barak searched the battlefield, Sisera was getting closer and closer. Sisera ran until his legs gave out from exhaustion, until he stumbled toward the tent of a woman named Jael, wife of Heber. There was peace between Heber's family and King Jabin, so Sisera believed he had found safety. Jael came out to meet him and told him not to be afraid. She brought him into her tent and covered him with a blanket. He asked for water, and she gave him milk instead, something warm and comforting that would help him rest. Sisera asked her to stand at the entrance of the tent and tell anyone who came looking that no one was inside. Then he fell into a deep sleep. While he slept, Jael took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand. She moved quietly toward him, and in one motion, she drove the peg through his temple and into the ground beneath him. Sisera died in his sleep, inside the tent of a woman he believed had offered him protection. Just as Deborah had said, the final blow did not come from Barak's hand. It came from a woman. Not long after, Barak arrived at Jael's tent, still searching for Sisera, still chasing the last thread of the enemy's power. Jael came out to meet him and told him to come inside so she could show him the man he was looking for. Barak stepped into the tent and found Sisera lying dead on the ground. The war was over. News of the victory spread across the hill country faster than any army could march. Deborah and Barak sang a song together that day, remembering everything that had happened.
Do you want to learn how to make these videos? Go to my YouTube page and watch the member-only video. I provide all the prompts I use, tools I use, and how I animate.
One wrong move, and the most loyal warrior would die. A simple man fought with King David for decades, risking everything for the king that he trusted with his life. But while Uriah was fighting on the battlefield, the king he served that he thought was his best friend, his brother, even his soul, was the man that impregnated Uriah's own wife, married her, and killed him in the end. In the army of Israel served a man named Uriah, a mighty warrior, one of the bravest fighters under King David, a soldier known for his discipline and his devotion to the men beside him. Uriah had a wife in Jerusalem named Bathsheba. Bathsheba would always greet him with a smile.
I made all of this for you, my love.
It looks incredible, my love.
Both of them were very faithful and happy, never imagining that this pure woman would one day commit a sin with King David so great that would eventually lead to Uriah's death. Israel's army marched out under the command of Joab, David's general, and set out against the Ammonites, a fierce nation to the east that had challenged Israel and now stood against them in battle. The army surrounded the Ammonite city of Rabbah, a stronghold with high walls and armed men guarding every gate. Uriah marched with them, taking his place at the front line, ready to fight. David, the king of Israel, did not go out to war that year. He stayed behind in his palace in Jerusalem. One evening, David rose from his bed and walked out onto the roof of his palace. From there, he looked down and saw a woman bathing with clothes on. She was very beautiful. David sent someone to find out who she was. The answer came back. This was Bathsheba, wife of Uriah. David's messengers led Bathsheba through the streets of Jerusalem and into the royal palace. "The king will see you now," one of the servants said quietly. Bathsheba took a slow breath before stepping inside. The servants left the room right after. The heavy doors closed behind her, leaving only the king and herself in the room. That night, David laid with Bathsheba. When it was over, she left the palace in silence and returned to her home, believing the evening was behind her. Days turned into weeks. Then, one morning, Bathsheba realized something was different. She sent a message to David containing only 3 words: "I am pregnant." At the siege of Rabbah, the army pressed against the walls day after day. Joab positioned his men in ranks around the city, watching for any weakness in its defenses. Uriah stood among the front ranks, his shield in hand, watching the walls with the rest of his company, waiting for the order to advance. Arrows came down from the towers from time to time, and the soldiers ducked behind their shields and pressed forward when they could, retreating when the fire from above grew too heavy. The siege dragged on, and the men grew used to sleeping in the open fields around the city, eating what rations came to them, keeping watch through the night in shifts, so the camp would never be caught unprepared. It was in the middle of this siege that a rider came from Jerusalem carrying a message from King David. He found Joab and delivered it. David wanted Uriah sent back to the capital at once. Joab called Uriah away from his company and told him the king had summoned him. Uriah handed his shield to another soldier, gathered what he needed for the road, and set out toward Jerusalem, leaving the siege lines behind him. Passing through small villages where farmers watched the lone soldier pass, until at last the walls of Jerusalem rose ahead of him. He came to the gates, was recognized by the guards, and made his way up through the city streets to the palace. He was brought before David. The king asked him how the war was going, how Joab was faring, how the men were holding up under the siege.
The fighting continues. There have been losses, and the walls of Rabbah still stand.
Then David said to him,
Go down to your house and rest.
David wanted Uriah to return home and spend the night with his wife, hoping everyone would believe the child Bathsheba was carrying belonged to Uriah instead of him. Uriah left the palace. A gift from the king was sent out after him, but Uriah did not go down to his house. Instead, he lay down at the entrance of the palace among the king's own servants, using his cloak as a blanket on the stone ground. In the morning, David was told, Uriah did not go to his house.
You have just come from a long journey. Why didn't you go home? The Ark of the Covenant and the armies of Israel and Judah are camped out in open fields right now, sleeping on the ground. My commander Joab and my brothers in arms have no roof over their heads tonight. How could I go home, eat, drink, and lie with my wife while they suffer out there? As surely as you live and as your soul lives, I will not do such a thing. Stay here one more day. Tomorrow I will send you back to the war. As you wish, my lord.
That evening, David invited him to sit and eat at his own table and poured him wine until Uriah was drunk, hoping this would finally send him home.
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
But even so, Uriah did not go to his house. He went out once more and lay down among the servants at the palace entrance, just as he had the night before. The next morning, David called for parchment and wrote a letter with his own hand, sealing it and giving it to Uriah to carry back to Joab. Inside that letter, David had written an order. Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest, then pull the rest of the men back from him, so that he will be struck down and die. Uriah took the sealed letter, thanked the king for his hospitality, and set out on the road back toward Rabbah, carrying in his own hands the command for his own death. He walked the long road east once more, through the same villages, across the same open country, until the siege camp came into view, and he made his way to Joab's tent to deliver the letter. Joab broke the seal and read the king's command. He said nothing of it to Uriah, but he studied the defenses of the city and found the place where the Ammonite fighters were strongest. Joab called his officers together and said,
Send Uriah to that section of the wall. When the fighting grows fierce, pull the rest of the men back from him.
The men looked at Joab and said,
But sir, how could we do this? Uriah doesn't stand a chance.
Joab had no other plan and said, It must be done. The next assault began. Uriah advanced with a small company toward the strong point in the wall. The men of the city, seeing the attack, threw open a gate and rushed out to meet them, striking at the exposed soldiers with spears and swords. As the fighting grew heavier near that section of the wall, the rest of Joab's men withdrew as ordered. Uriah fought where he stood, but the men of the city overwhelmed that position. Uriah fell there along with several other servants of David.
Take this report to the king. Yes, commander.
Joab knew many soldiers had died during the attack, and he expected King David to ask why the battle had gone so badly. So he told the messenger that if David questioned what had happened, he should end with one important sentence. Your servant Uriah is dead also. The messenger set out from the camp and traveled the road to Jerusalem until he reached the city gates. He was brought before David and gave his account. The army had attacked. The men of the city had come out into the open field against them. The fighting had pushed back to the entrance of the gate, and archers on the wall had struck down several of the king's servants. Then the messenger added,
Your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Tell Joab, do not let this trouble you.
Strengthen your attack against the city and destroy it.
The siege continued at Rabbah, and in time Joab and his men broke through the city's defenses and captured it. But back in Jerusalem, word reached Bathsheba that her husband had fallen in battle. As it is written in 2 Samuel 11:26, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. When the days of mourning were finished, David sent for her and brought her into his own house, and she became his wife. In time, she bore him a son. But what David had done was evil in the eyes of the Lord. The Lord sent the prophet Nathan to the king. Nathan came before David and said,
There were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and one poor.
The rich man owned very large flocks of sheep and herds of cattle. The poor man had nothing at all except one small ewe lamb, which he had bought and raised himself. It grew up together with him and his children. It ate from his own plate, drank from his own cup, and slept in his arms like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to visit the rich man, but instead of taking a sheep from his own enormous flock to prepare a meal for his guest, the rich man seized the poor man's only lamb and served it to the traveler instead. David's anger burned hot against the man in the story, and he said to Nathan,
As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must repay for that lamb 4 times over, because he showed no pity at all.
Nathan looked at the king and said,
You are that man.
This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to you. I anointed you king over Israel.
I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and his wives.
I gave you the house of Israel and Judah.
Why then have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and you took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the sons of Ammon. I have sinned against the Lord.
The Lord has taken away your sin. You will not die for this. Because you have shown contempt for the Lord by this deed, the son born to you will die.
Not long after, the child that Bathsheba had borne to David grew grew sick. David pleaded with God for the child, fasting and lying on the ground through the night. But on the seventh day, the child died.
Do you want to learn how to make these videos? Go to my YouTube page and watch the member-only video. I provide all the prompts I use, tools I use, and how I animate. These videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
One wrong move, and everyone would destroy him. A single warrior stood alone against 800 enemy soldiers with nothing but a spear in his hand. The men around him looked at him and thought he was crazy. His enemies laughed and mocked him, but as Jashobeam was swinging his spear, the men looked closely at his face and realized he was a complete monster. How did one simple man beat an entire army with only a spear? To understand this, we must go back to the beginning of Jashobeam's story. Israel was in a dangerous time. King Saul was losing control of the kingdom, and he was searching everywhere for David, trying to kill him before he could become the next king. David had no throne, no army, and no safe place to stay. He spent his days hiding in caves and moving from one place to another. Jashobeam arrived at one of these caves late one evening, carrying his own weapons and nothing else. He stepped into the firelight where David's small band of followers sat resting. Jashobeam said only that he had come to fight, and he sat down among them without another word. From the moment he arrived, everyone could see he was different from the rest. He carried a spear that few other men could even lift, let alone use in battle. He trained every day, even in the caves, practicing his strikes against the rock walls. A runner came into camp, breathing hard.
They're coming! From the hills! An army! How many? Too many! We must go!
The soldiers with David began to gather their weapons at once, checking their positions, watching the distant hills for the first sign of movement. Jashobeam stood among them, quiet, watching the same hills. "We'll make our stand here," one of the older soldiers said, pointing to a narrow path the enemy would have to cross to reach David's camp. The men nodded and quickly took their positions among the rocks. Jashobeam stood near the front, closer to the path than almost anyone else. The enemy charged straight toward David's camp, confident they would crush the small force defending it. David's men fought back with everything they had, but they were badly outnumbered. Around Jashobeam, most soldiers began falling back toward the rocks as more and more enemies poured into the fight. Jashobeam did not retreat. A man next to Jashobeam watched in complete fear and prepared to run away. But he saw that Jashobeam wasn't planning on retreating. The man screamed,
Jashobeam, we must retreat! Don't be a fool, it's suicide!
But Jashobeam didn't care, and the man ran away from everything. Jashobeam planted his feet and raised his spear, and as the first wave of enemy soldiers reached him, he began to fight. He struck one man down, then turned and struck another, moving constantly, refusing to let any single enemy get behind him. The men around him who had been falling back paused for a moment, some of them turning to see what was happening, seeing one man standing firm while the rest of the line bent backward around him. More enemy soldiers pushed toward him, drawn by the sight of a single warrior refusing to break. Some of them began shouting to one another as they closed in, calling out that surely one man alone could not hold against so many for long, that if they simply kept coming, he would tire and fall like any other soldier eventually would. Jashobeam met each one as they came, his spear moving fast, striking low and then high, never staying still long enough for an enemy blade to find him. The fighting pressed in tighter around him as more soldiers arrived, forming almost a half circle. Jashobeam never looked behind him. He trusted David's men were still holding the line somewhere behind him, so he kept all his attention on the enemies in front of him. The enemy kept coming. Wave after wave pressed toward the spot where Jashobeam stood. Some of the enemy soldiers, seeing so many of their own men fall in that one place, began shouting to each other, trying to organize a stronger push against him. Jashobeam's arms grew heavy as the fighting stretched on, but he did not slow his pace. Sweat ran down his face, and his breathing came harder. With every passing exchange, he fought without pausing to rest, without stepping back even once to catch his breath. After a while, Jashobeam really started to feel the exhaustion. Enemies came at him multiple times again, but it all made him more tired. Jashobeam started doubting whether he could truly beat them or not. But warriors like Jashobeam are not made in one battle. They are built through years nobody sees. Every morning before the sun came up, his father would take him outside their home with a wooden spear in his hand. Jashobeam swung the spear, but his father knocked it away easily. He tried again and again, but every time, the spear fell from his hands.
Jashobeam, strength is not in never falling. It is in rising every time you do. Take the spear. Learn from this.
Years passed, and Jashobeam refused to stop training. While other boys rested, he stayed outside until the sky grew dark, repeating the same movements hundreds of times. But every morning, he came back. One day, a group of older warriors saw him training and laughed. They told him that swinging a spear against the air did not make someone a fighter. One of them stepped forward to challenge him, expecting an easy victory. But this time was different. The warrior attacked first, but Jashobeam stepped aside and knocked the weapon from his hands. His father watched from a distance, knowing the weak boy he once trained was gone. But Jashobeam had no idea that every moment of training was preparing him for a day when he would not face one warrior, but hundreds.
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
At one point, 3 enemy soldiers came at him together, spreading out to attack from different angles at the same time. He finished the first soldier a moment later, and the second turned to run rather than face him alone, disappearing back into the larger mass of enemy soldiers still approaching from the ridge. Behind him, some of David's other soldiers began to notice that the ground where Jashobeam stood had not moved, even as the fighting around it spread and shifted in every direction. A few of them started making their way back toward that spot. They fought their way closer, cutting down enemy soldiers as they went, calling out to each other to regroup near where Jashobeam still stood. Though, even then, it was Jashobeam himself who kept cutting down the largest share of the enemies pressing forward. The fighting continued for a long stretch of the day, enemy soldiers falling one after another around him, the ground beneath his feet growing crowded with the bodies of those who had tried and failed to bring him down. Some of the attacking soldiers, seeing what had happened to so many who came before them, began to hesitate before stepping forward, glancing at each other as though hoping someone else would be the one to try next. Jashobeam did not wait for them to decide. He pressed forward himself when the moment allowed it, striking down anyone still within reach. As the hours wore on, the enemy's confidence began to break apart entirely. A commander among the enemy soldiers, watching from a distance, shouted orders trying to organize another push, but fewer and fewer of his men were willing to move forward when he gave the command. Jashobeam kept fighting, even as the numbers in front of him thinned, cutting down the last few soldiers bold enough to still come at him directly. By the time the fighting finally ended, the enemy force that had come down the ridge with such confidence had been broken completely. 800 of them lay dead on the ground, and every single one of them had fallen to Jashobeam's spear alone. Word of what had happened spread through David's camp before Jashobeam had even made his way back. David heard the account from a soldier, and he called for Jashobeam to be brought before him at once. When Jashobeam stood in front of David, still carrying the marks of the battle on his arms and his armor, the men around them were already talking quietly among themselves about what rank a warrior like this deserved among David's growing band of fighters. There was no question in anyone's mind, and no one argued against it. From that day forward, Jashobeam was named Chief of the Three, placed above every other warrior in David's army, brought more battles, more narrow escapes, more nights spent hiding from Saul's soldiers in the hills and wilderness of the land. Through all of it, Jashobeam remained close to David. But while he continued fighting beside David, a much larger war was happening elsewhere. The Philistines gathered their armies and marched against Israel, forcing Saul to lead his soldiers into battle. But the fight quickly turned against him. The Israelite army was overwhelmed. Saul's sons were struck down. Jashobeam watched David finally sit on the throne of Israel. But becoming king did not mean David's battles were over. The enemies around Israel were still waiting, and the small group of warriors who protected David in the caves now had to protect an entire kingdom. David began building a real army, and he needed men he could trust to lead it. He needed strong and loyal men, and among all of them, Jashobeam stood first. David placed him over the 1st Division of Israel's army, giving him command over 24,000 soldiers. Every month, different divisions of soldiers were responsible for protecting the kingdom, and Jashobeam commanded the first group called to serve.
Remember, some of the tiny stories in this video isn't biblically accurate, they are made for cinematic reasons. But the story itself is almost fully accurate. Do you want to learn how to make these videos? Go to my YouTube page and watch the member-only video. I provide all the prompts I use, tools I use, and how I animate.
He was not the strongest warrior in Israel, but no man alive could catch him when he ran. Asahel was one of 3 sons born to Uriah. His oldest brother, Joab, was already known throughout Israel as a feared commander, a man who led armies into a bloodshed battle. His other brother, Abishai, was known as a dangerous warrior in his own right, a man who fought without fear. Asahel grew up watching both of his brothers rise in reputation among David's men, hearing their names spoken with respect around the camp, and he wanted a name of his own among them. But Asahel's gift was different from his brothers. Nobody called him the strongest man in the army. Nobody called him the biggest. What set him apart from every other soldier was one simple fact: nobody could outrun him. The Bible describes him as being as fast on his feet as a wild gazelle out in the open field. From the time he was young, running was the one thing he could do better than anyone else around him. And he carried that speed with him as he grew older, all the way into David's army, where he took his place beside Joab and Abishai in the ranks. For years, Asahel served under his brother Joab, learning the ways of war. He waited for a moment that would let him prove himself the way his brothers already had. King Saul had died in battle against the Philistines. With Saul gone, Israel found itself without a king everyone agreed on. The tribe of Judah in the south moved quickly, anointing David as their king. But the rest of Israel's tribes in the north did not follow David right away. Instead, Abner, the commander who had served faithfully under Saul for years, took one of Saul's surviving sons, a man named Ishbosheth, and set him up as king over the northern tribes. So now, Israel had 2 kings standing against each other: David ruling in the south from Hebron, and Ishbosheth ruling in the north. Everyone in both camps understood that this division could not hold for long. Sooner or later, the 2 sides would have to meet, and when they did, it would not stay peaceful. Joab, serving as commander of David's forces, gathered his men and led them out from Hebron toward a place near the pool of Gibeon. Abner, commanding the forces loyal to Ishbosheth, marched his own men to that same place. The 2 armies arrived from opposite directions and took up their positions on either side of the pool, close enough to see each other, clearly across the water, close enough to hear voices carried on the wind. Abner was the one who called out first. "Let the young men get up and fight in front of us!" he shouted across to Joab. Joab called back, "Let them get up." 12 young men stepped forward from Benjamin's side, from Ishbosheth's army, and 12 stepped forward from among David's servants to meet them. Each man from one side grabbed his opponent from the other side by the head. and drove his sword into his opponent's ribs. All 24 of them collapsed together and died where they stood. That patch of ground came to be known afterward as the Field of Sharp Edges, remembered for what took place there that day. What had started as a small contest between chosen men did not stay contained for long. The fighting spread outward from where the 24 had fallen, spilling into the ranks on both sides until the entire two armies were locked together in open battle. Swords clashing, shields cracking, men falling in every direction across the field. The fighting grew fiercer as the hours passed, neither side willing to be the first to break. By the time the day wore on toward its end, Abner and the men of Israel had been driven back and defeated before the servants of David. Abner's lines broke apart, and his soldiers began to scatter and run from the battlefield, with Joab's men pushing forward behind them in pursuit. This is where Asahel's moment finally came. In the middle of the chaos, as Abner's army broke and ran, Asahel caught sight of Abner himself fleeing across the field. He was not looking at some ordinary soldier trying to escape with the rest of the retreating army. He was looking at the commander of the entire northern army, the very man who had set Ishbosheth on the throne and split the nation in two. Asahel understood immediately what it would mean to bring a man like that down with his own hands. So Asahel turned his eyes on Abner and began to run. The Bible says plainly that he did not turn to the right or to the left as he went. He gave up on everything else happening around him on that battlefield and followed Abner, and Abner alone, with everything his legs could give him.
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
Some soldiers ran to escape, others gave chase, and here and there men fell where the fighting had caught up with them. In the middle of all that noise and confusion, Asahel's eyes never left the one man ahead of him, and his feet, faster than any other man's in either army, closed the distance between them with every stride he took. But Abner knew something that Asahel, in the heat of the chase, did not yet understand. Speed alone does not decide a fight. Abner was older than Asahel and far more experienced in close combat, a man who had led armies and survived battles long before Asahel had picked up his first sword. As Asahel gained ground behind him, Abner glanced back over his shoulder to see exactly who was closing in on him. "Is that you, Asahel?" Abner called out, still running. "It is," Asahel answered, not slowing his pace at all. Abner tried to warn him away from what was coming. "Turn aside to the left or to the right," he said. "Take hold of one of the young men instead." In plain words, he was telling Asahel to stop chasing a commander he had no business fighting, and instead find some soldier closer to his experience. Asahel would not turn aside. Abner spoke again, and this time his words carried more weight. "Stop chasing me," he said. "Why should I have to strike you down? How could I ever look your brother Joab in the face again if I did?" These words revealed something important about Abner in that moment. He did not want to kill Asahel. He respected Joab, and he understood clearly that killing Joab's own brother would create a blood feud that would follow him for the rest of his life. No matter how, the larger war between the two kingdoms eventually ended. Even so, Asahel refused to stop. He kept coming, faster than Abner could outrun on open ground, until there was no more room left between them for words to settle it. As Asahel finally drew alongside him, Abner made his choice. He thrust the butt end of his spear backward without turning fully around, striking Asahel in the stomach. The spear drove all the way through his body and came out of the other side. Asahel fell to the ground, exactly where he was struck, and he died there, on the spot, the chase ending in an instant. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the rest of the retreating soldiers. They stood there instead, looking down at his body. This alone, men from David's own army pausing mid-chase at the sight of him, showed just how deeply respected Asahel had been among the ranks. Joab and Abishai did not stop, though. They kept running after Abner and the remainder of his fleeing army as the sun began sinking behind them. They followed him all the way to the hill of Ammah, near a place called Giah, on the road toward the wilderness of Gibeon. There, the men of Benjamin, who remained loyal to Abner, gathered themselves together and took a stand at the top of the hill, refusing to run any farther. From where he stood, Abner called down to Joab. "Must the sword go on devouring forever?" he shouted. Joab called back up to him. "Don't you know this will only end in bitterness? How long before you tell your soldiers to stop chasing after their own brothers?" With that, Joab raised his trumpet and blew it. And every one of his men stopped where they stood, ending the pursuit of Abner's army for that day. No further fighting broke out between them that night. Abner and what remained of his men marched on through the darkness, crossing the Jordan River and continuing until they reached Mahanaim by morning. Joab, for his part, turned back from the chase and gathered his own men together to count the cost of the day's fighting. When the count was finished, 19 of David's soldiers were missing, in addition to Asahel. Abner's side had lost far more, 360 men of Benjamin who had followed him and died in the retreat. Joab and his men lifted Asahel's body and carried it the long road to Bethlehem, where they laid him to rest in the tomb that belonged to his father. Then Joab gathered his men once more, and they marched through the remainder of the night, arriving back in Hebron. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David dragged on for a long time. After that, growing weaker on Abner's side and stronger on David's side, eventually, Abner decided he had had enough of serving a weakening king. He sent word to David that he was ready to bring all of Israel's northern tribes over to him, ending the long division between the two kingdoms once and for all. Abner traveled to Hebron to meet with David face to face, and the two of them came to an agreement together. David held a feast for him, received him in peace, and sent him away in peace, believing that the long conflict between their two houses was finally coming to a close. But Joab had not forgotten what had happened to his brother. When Joab returned to Hebron from a raid and learned that Abner had come to the city and left again peacefully, he went straight to David and confronted him. "What have you done?" Joab demanded. "Abner came to you, and you let him go in peace? Now he's gone, free to do as he pleases." Without telling David, Joab sent his own messengers after Abner, and they caught up with him and brought him back to Hebron. When Abner arrived, Joab pulled him aside at the city gate, speaking to him as though he only wanted a private word. There, in that quiet moment, Joab struck him in the stomach with his sword, and Abner fell dead. Joab had killed him to settle the blood of his brother Asahel, who had fallen so many seasons before by Abner's spear on the battlefield near Gibeon.
Do you want to learn how to make these videos? Go to my YouTube page and watch the member-only video. I provide all the prompts I use, tools I use, and how I animate. These videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.